I've lived in Tucson almost my whole life, born and raised here. It's always just been me, my parents, and our beloved border collie, Buddy. We live a pretty quiet life out here in the suburbs. Dad works as a supervisor on a construction crew downtown, Mom's a nurse, and I just graduated high school last spring. I decided to take some time off before college to work and save up some money. Been working weekdays at the local auto parts store and just hanging out with friends on weekends, playing video games or hiking out in the desert preserves around town. I will say this past month has been strange, though nothing compared to the crazy stuff you'll soon hear about. Buddy has been acting peculiar, whining for no reason, refusing to eat sometimes, getting oddly aggressive if strangers come by the house. My parents took him to the vet, but they couldn't find anything significantly wrong. Maybe just anxiety or getting older, they said. Still, Buddy has been our family dog since I was 5 years old, so it was worrying to see him behaving erratically. Anyway, the weekend before this all went down, my parents headed up to Phoenix to visit my Aunt Shelley, who was recovering from surgery. They planned to stay the whole weekend to help her out. I volunteered to watch the house and Buddy while they were gone. I picked up a few weekend shifts at the shop, but was otherwise just chilling at home, playing Xbox, tossing the tennis ball to Buddy in the backyard between games. Saturday night, my buddy Carlos swung by, and we drove over to this little Mexican restaurant downtown called Guelaguetza. Awesome authentic food. Been going there with my folks since I was a kid. Carlos and I stuffed ourselves on mole chicken enchiladas and churros before heading home late, probably 11 p.m. When I got back, I let Buddy out in the backyard real quick. Then I fired up Resident Evil 4 on the old PS2, still a classic game all these years later, and vegged out till I couldn't keep my eyes open any longer. So to reiterate, on the night in question, my parents were away visiting my aunt in Phoenix, so I had the place to myself. I was getting back around 9 p.m. after going out to dinner with friends. As I pulled into the driveway, I remembered I needed to let my dog Buddy out of his kennel run for the night. His chain-link kennel is in the backyard, up against the rear wall of the house, with about a 4-5-foot path of dirt and rocks separating it from the back of the garage. Buddy had been acting oddly distressed lately, which is why I made sure to stay home while my parents were gone. I went inside, watched some TV for an hour or so, then headed out back to put Buddy up for the night. I grabbed his leash but didn't bother with shoes, since he usually does his business right there in the narrow space between the kennel and garage. Our garage just has one dim light glowing over the back door, so there's not much illumination, but enough to see the general area. As Buddy was sniffing around the rocks facing me, he suddenly lurched up in the air with his hind legs like something had grabbed him from behind. He pulled free and came running back to me in a panic. That's when I heard a rustling in the rocks and saw a strange figure emerge into the dim glow of the garage light. I'm 5'10", and yet I had to look upwards to see the head of whatever this thing was. It had to be at least 7 feet tall, with long, pale limbs and an unnaturally narrow frame. The skin seemed an off shade, almost grayish instead of flesh-toned. It turned its head and looked directly at me for a few seconds with eyes that reflected the faint light. Then it suddenly spun around and loped off on all fours into the darkness. The speed and awkward gait were freakish, like nothing I'd ever seen a human mimic. I hastily dragged Buddy inside, heart pounding. After debating whether to call 911, I decided to first see if any neighbors nearby had heard my startled yell. Sure enough, within 15 minutes, a patrol car pulled up the driveway to check out reports of suspicious activity behind my house. I just told them I'd seen someone snooping around and declined further police intervention. No way was I going to try explaining the inhuman figure to them. I still have no idea what I really witnessed. Some bizarre crypto creature, Meth addict having a severely bad trip in my backyard. I don't consider myself a believer in paranormal stuff like Bigfoot or alien encounters, but after that night, let's just say my beliefs have been shaken. I definitely won't be letting the dog out alone after dark anymore, that's for sure. What the hell was that thing? Why was it prowling around a typical neighborhood? Maybe when my parents return, I'll try explaining the whole freaky experience, see if they have any theories, because I remain utterly stumped. I wish I could say life has returned to normal since that night, but I don't think I'll ever look at the world the same way again. When something so uncanny, so unsettling shatters your sense of reality, you can't just go back to your old paradigm. I replay those brief, paralyzing moments in the garage light over and over, trying to make sense of them. What did I see? Some weird desert yeti? An alien? A freakishly huge feral human or escaped experiment from a government lab like Area 51? None of those explanations fully fit, yet none seem totally impossible anymore. My parents could tell I was really shaken when they returned from Phoenix. Once I hesitantly told them the whole story, my dad got unusually grim and quiet. My mom became extra protective, not letting me go out jogging alone in our neighborhood like I used to enjoy. I can't tell if they think I hallucinated the whole thing or if it confirmed some secret fears they had about the unknown darkness lurking in the Sonoran desert surrounding Tucson. We took Buddy to a couple other vets, but no one could explain his sudden aggression either. My mom even had a priest come bless our house, just in case. At work, I quietly asked my buddy Jeremy in the parts department if he'd ever seen or heard about anything freaky out in the Tucson region. I figured maybe local legends and cryptids. His face went stiff, and he tersely said, "Nope," changed the subject real quick. I could tell he wasn't being totally truthful, though. Then, just yesterday, I was helping a customer load some car batteries into her Subaru, made some innocuous comment about the summer monsoons coming. She gave me an odd look and asked quietly if the rains had been waking up things out in the arroyos, as the Native Americans warned. She didn't elaborate, but her intensity left me chilled as she drove off. Maybe others around here know secrets they're afraid to openly discuss regarding what lies half hidden in this desert, appearing only at the periphery of perception to the unfortunate witness. Count me now among the cautious believers haunted by uncanny encounters most prefer not to imagine. If there are answers to be found about the tall, pale lurker in my backyard or Buddy's trauma, I have a feeling they reside in realms beyond rational understanding. My eyes are open now, but ignorance can indeed be bliss when the truth is too unsettling to comprehend. Next story. I grew up in the small rural town of Donny Park, nestled high in the ponderosa pine forests along the southern edge of the San Francisco Peaks near Flagstaff. My family has lived in this remote region for generations, making a living from the land through hunting, farming, and working the timber mills. As kids, my best friend Jack Larson and I spent our free time camping and exploring the woods that stretch for endless miles, biking along dusty back roads, and fishing the network of lakes left by ancient volcanoes. We felt at home under the trees or the wide expanse of stars overhead at night, though our parents warned us never to wander too deep or stay out too late. Strange things were said to haunt these ancient hills, legends and mysteries lurking in forgotten corners. After high school, work and family kept Jack and me close to home, but we jumped at every chance to head out into our beloved wilderness together. Just before my 30th birthday this past June, I came into ownership of my late granddad's old trapping cabin located 35 miles outside Donny Park, granted to me along with the 100 acres of forest surrounding it. Jack and I took a week off in mid-July to camp at the abandoned cabin that Granddad had built himself in the 1950s. It sat in a meadow at the foot of the mountains, miles from the nearest dirt road. The plan was to air it out, do some repairs, and prep it to become our new base for future retreats, a way to revive the wild adventures of our youth. Granddad left me his .30-30 Winchester rifle and an old compound bow to bring. We loaded up my beat-up Jeep Wrangler with supplies and drove the winding mountain roads until they turned to gravel, then dirt, finally ending at a gate meant to keep out trespassers. Lugging our gear the last 2 miles on foot, we laughed about the wild animals that must have reclaimed the meadow in Granddad's decade-long absence. It was a hot July afternoon when my buddy Jack and I set off into the remote wilderness of northern Arizona for a camping and hunting trip. We were headed to my family's old cabin located at the edge of hundreds of acres of dense forest outside Flagstaff, which would serve as our base camp. The first morning out, one of Jack's dogs failed to come when called. We were shocked to find the poor thing laying lifeless in a gully, its neck grotesquely twisted around. No coyote or mountain lion could grab a dog's head and chin to wring its neck like that, I noted with chills. We'd been hearing eerie cries echoing from the peaks above for days. Grabbing the four-wheelers from the shed, we rode out to investigate what might have killed that dog. We crossed miles of untracked forest to a desolate ridge, circling to mark our path in the mud. As the sun dipped low, we headed back, still finding no traces of the mysterious killer. But at the cabin, we heard twigs snapping close by in the darkness. The remaining dogs erupted in savage barking before bolting into the woods. Then the cabin itself shuddered as if rammed by a freight train, metallic creaking and the pop of straining nails. The assault ended as quickly as it began. We armed up with Ghost with rifles and Bowie knives to search for the source out on the four-wheelers. As night crept through the woods, we passed an old graveyard, entering a moonlit field. Raising my goggles, I spotted a shape standing tall through the high grass. "What is that? A twisted tree?" Jack whispered. But it moved, shifting forward onto two legs easily 9 feet high. "Look at the size of that thing!" The proportions were all wrong for a man, the arms too long, ending in curving talons. It twisted to face us with eyes reflecting red in the darkness, issuing an unearthly roar that vibrated through my bones. "Pump gas!" I yelled, firing off a shot as we peeled back toward the cabin. Reaching the shed, we turned to glimpse the giant barreling after us impossibly fast. It towered inhumanly tall, even from a distance before the forest swallowed its shape. Back inside, we sealed the doors and windows. Neither of us slept that night, listening in dread for a return of that thing from the peak. I'll never forget that towering, misshapen horror, nor its infernal cry. Like Jack, it shook my skepticism. There are things lurking in the wilderness untouched by man or time, perhaps waiting to reclaim their dominion. I know the truth now. This land is more than just earth and stone, and we are not its only masters. This whole thing really has changed my understanding of the world forever. The terrified hike back to the cabin with Jack barely registered in my adrenaline-fueled state. We hunkered down with rifles close through the remaining darkness, dreading the return of that impossible monster towering twice the height of a normal man. As sunrise illuminated the woods once more, I forced myself outside to search for tracks or signs of its presence. But the dense pine needles showed no trace of the giant's path, almost as if it had never trod the earth at all. Jack and I packed up camp in record time, scanning the tree line constantly for monsters as we retreated to my Jeep. Neither of us spoke during the jarring drive back to town along washboard roads. In the sober light of everyday modern life, I struggled to convince myself the apparition in the meadow had just been shadows and imagination. But deep down, I knew Jack and I had glimpsed something unknown, something that defied simple understanding. I started digging deeper into local legends, particularly tales of strange creatures glimpsed but rarely by hunters or hikers across the centuries. The most common concerned tall, hairy wild men, remnants perhaps of Gigantopithecus, the 10-foot ancestors of Bigfoot believed to have crossed the Siberian land bridge. But a handful of reports also mentioned spindly, pale-skinned beings over 8 feet tall stalking remote areas and circling camps in the night. They were known as stickmen or pale crawlers in whispered campfire accounts. I had never believed such stories until that moonlit night. My skepticism toward other fringe topics evaporated as well. Jack's Uncle Cal, a 30-year forest ranger, confessed his own encounter 5 years prior after too many whiskeys one night. He had spotted a large orb of glowing purple light weaving slowly among the trees near Sunset Crater before it shot upward and disappeared. 2 days later, all the ponderosa pines within a quarter-mile radius were found mysteriously burnt and dead inside a perfect circle. And my coworker Stacy revealed that her father, a grizzled Air Force veteran, claimed to have once helped guard a crashed UFO locked inside Hangar 18 at Wright-Patterson AFB back in 1947. Their stories only reinforced my newfound understanding that we know very little about this strange, ancient world we inhabit, or the things that lurk just out of sight within it. Next story. The engine hummed a familiar lullaby, the rhythmic rumble my constant companion through sun-baked Arizona summers and bone-chilling winter nights. 10 years on the road, hauling everything from chrome-plated Cadillacs to cattle feed, had etched canyons of wear and tear on my rig and lines of fatigue around my eyes. But that's the trucker's life, ain't it? Chasing horizons painted in diesel fumes, trading cityscapes for endless ribbons of asphalt. My name's Hank Hawkeye Miller, and my current view was a kaleidoscope of burnt sienna mesas and scrub brush dancing in the dying embers of a Tucson sunset. This haul was different, though. Not the cargo, just another load of copper wire, dull as ditch water. It was the weight on my chest, a leaden lump that wouldn't budge with even the strongest black coffee. See, I'd just left Tucson, fresh off burying my brother Jimmy. Cancer, the damn thing. Ate him alive at 37, leaving behind a wife, Lily, looking as lost as a tumbleweed in a windstorm, and a little girl, Sarah, with eyes as wide and blue as the Arizona sky. Jimmy, always the joker, the life of the party, gone. Poof. Just like that. Left Lily and Sarah at Jimmy's place, promised I'd check in when I hit Safford. Didn't want to leave him alone, not with vultures already circling, whispering about insurance settlements and Jimmy's troubled investments. Yeah, Jimmy had a knack for finding trouble, bless his soul, but he loved his family, fierce as a desert hawk protecting its nest. And I, being Jimmy's older brother, carried that same hawk's blood, same protective streak. So I hit the road, leaving Lily and Sarah with promises and the faint metallic tang of grief in the air. Now, the sun was a fading ember on the horizon, casting long, skeletal shadows across the highway. Radio sputtered static, competing with the engine's steady drone. My mind, it wouldn't settle. Jimmy's face kept flashing behind my eyelids, his grin plastered over that damn hospital bed. Lily's eyes, red-rimmed and raw, haunted me in the rearview mirror. And then, just as the first stars pricked the velvet twilight, I saw it. A flicker, a shape on the edge of the road, darker than the shadows cast by the saguaros. And that's where this story, this bone-chilling tale, truly begins. Arizona's got its own brand of weird too, let me tell you. It was a scorcher, the way August in Phoenix makes the asphalt shimmer like mirages. Sun had gone down an hour back, but that doesn't mean it lost its grip on the air. Still thick enough to taste, dust swirling like tumbleweeds against the headlights of my rig. I was hauling a bellyful of steel across the long, lonesome stretch of I-10, heading east towards Safford. Radio sputtered static, only competing with the whine of the engine for my attention. Then, just south of Oracle Junction, something flickered in the peripheral. A shadow on the edge of the ditch, darker than the blacktop. Figured it was a javelina at first, those desert pigs that dart across the highway like suicidal pinballs. But as I got closer, my gut tightened like a rusty lug nut. Nope, no snout or bristly rump. This was two legs, spindly as saguaro ribs, silhouetted against the pale moon rising behind the Santa Catalina Mountains. It stood dead still, halfway in the ditch, halfway on the asphalt, like a discarded scarecrow forgotten by the wind. Now, I've seen desert creatures that defy God's good reason, scorpions the size of dinner plates, lizards that hiss like vipers. But this was different. As I pulled closer, headlights bathing the figure in stark white, my breath hitched like a stalled engine. No face, not the way you'd think, like it was carved from bleached bone, smooth as a river stone, no eyes, no nose, no hint of a mouth. Just two dark hollows where something should have been, reflecting the high beams like bottomless wells. And the skin, man, it was like parchment stretched over a skeleton, paper-thin and pale as moonlight on gypsum dunes. I slammed on the brakes, tires screaming their protest against the asphalt. Rig shuddered to a stop, engine protesting the sudden silence. Dust motes danced in the headlights, swirling around the figure like it was made of smoke. It didn't move, didn't even blink, just stood there, staring into the abyss of my high beams, and I swear, I felt a coldness seep into the cab, despite the August heat. The kind of cold that crawls up your spine and into your skull, making your teeth chatter and your blood run ice. My foot hovered over the gas pedal, engine a nervous drumbeat in the stillness. My mind screamed, "Get out of here!" But every fiber of my being was rooted to the seat, eyes locked on that faceless void. Then it moved. A slow, almost imperceptible shift, tilting its head like a curious desert owl. And in that tilt, in that slight movement, I saw it. Not on its face, no, but on its chest, carved into the bone-white skin, a single word, black as sin against the moonlight. Vini. "Come," it whispered, not with a voice, but with a feeling, a shiver down my spine, a cold wind through my bones. My foot slammed down on the pedal, engine roaring like a startled beast. Tires clawed at the asphalt, throwing dust and gravel in a wild dance. I didn't look back, just gunned it down the highway, rig shaking like a haunted house in a windstorm. Didn't slow down until the lights of Safford shimmered in the distance, like a beacon of human sanity against the desert's hungry dark. That night, tucked in a greasy diner booth, coffee bitter on my tongue, I kept seeing it. The faceless figure, the bottomless black holes in its head, the whisper word etched on its bone-white chest. And I knew, with a chilling certainty that settled in my gut like a scorpion's sting, I wasn't the first to see it on that lonely stretch of highway. And maybe, just maybe, I wouldn't be the last. The desert, they say, has its own secrets, its own shadows. And this one, the faceless one, was a secret I'd just as soon leave buried in the dust of I-10. You'd think seeing something straight out of a desert nightmare would crack your worldview like a dropped egg. Maybe turn you into one of those tinfoil hat-wearing folks screaming about government lizard people. But truth is, the faceless one on I-10 didn't shatter my world. It just chipped away at the edges, revealing cracks I hadn't seen before. Sleep became a restless beast. my nights haunted by moonlit glimpses of that bone-white skin and the bottomless black holes where its eyes should be. Coffee turned bitter, even with an extra heaping spoonful of sugar. Every shadow on the road, every flicker of headlights on a distant peak sent chills dancing down my spine. Fear? Hell yeah, there was fear. But also a strange, morbid curiosity. What or who the hell was that thing? Was it some ancient desert spirit? A whisper of forgotten tribes and lost legends? A figment of my grief-addled mind? Or something darker? Something beyond human comprehension, crawling from the cracks of reality? I started digging, nose deep in dusty books at truck stops, chatting up old-timers in greasy diners. Turns out, the desert whispers secrets, like tumbleweeds carrying tales on the wind. Stories of skinwalkers, shapeshifters who could take the form of animals, luring the unwary to their doom. Ghost towns haunted by miners who dug too deep, unearthing things better left buried. Whispers of portals hidden in the folds of canyons, gateways to other worlds, other dimensions. Some laughed me off, called me loco in the head. Others, their eyes a little too knowing, shared their own tales. Old Pete, the mechanic with hands stained like engine oil, swore he saw a glowing orb dance across the sky one night, leaving a trail of smoke that smelled like brimstone. Slim Jim, the trucker with a face like weathered leather, talked about a stretch of road near Flagstaff where radios cut out and shadows stretched unnaturally long, and where sometimes you could hear whispers on the wind that sounded like voices from another time. Me? I don't know what to believe. Maybe it's all just campfire stories, tall tales spun by lonely men under a vast, indifferent sky. But then again, maybe there's more to this world, more to the universe than meets the eye. Maybe that faceless figure on I-10 wasn't a nightmare, but a glimpse into something real, something ancient and terrible. Whatever it was, it changed me, made me see the desert with new eyes, hear the wind with new ears. It didn't turn me into a believer, not exactly, but it made me a witness, a storyteller. And maybe, just maybe, that's enough. Because sometimes the scariest stories aren't the ones with monsters and ghosts. They're the ones that remind you, in the quiet hum of your truck engine under a moonlit sky, that the world is a bigger, stranger place than you ever imagined. And sometimes, all you can do is keep driving, keep telling the stories, and hope to hell you don't catch another glimpse of something with no eyes, no mouth, and a whisper that chills your soul like the desert wind. Next story. Hi. I remember it was during a scorching summer in Arizona, specifically in the small town of Bisbee, when I was about 15 years old. That year, the heat was unbearable, often hitting over 100 degrees. As a teenager, I was more interested in exploring the old copper mines, and less about taking precautions. One day, while exploring the Queen Mine, I felt dizzy and lost consciousness. When I came to, I was in a hospital in Tucson. I had suffered from severe dehydration and heat stroke. The doctors told me I was lucky to be alive. I was in the hospital for what seemed like forever, staring at the sterile white walls. My uncle, who was my guardian since my parents passed away, visited me once and then, just like a mirage, disappeared. I was left alone, with just the beeping of machines for company. One evening, as the sun was setting, casting an orange glow through the window, I suddenly felt a strange sensation. I turned towards the window and saw what appeared to be two figures standing there. They were tall and thin, almost ethereal, with a faint shimmering around them. I couldn't believe my eyes. I thought it was a trick of the light, but they were there, looking right at me. In a panic, I tried to get up, but I was too weak. I remember calling for the nurse, but when she arrived, the figures had vanished. I didn't talk about it to anyone, thinking they would say it was a hallucination. But I knew what I saw. It was real. A few years later, I was living in Phoenix, and one night, my husband was working late, so I went to bed alone. Our house was always pitch dark at night, nestled as it was at the edge of the desert. That night, after I had turned off the lights and settled into bed, I suddenly felt a weight on me. I opened my eyes to darkness, but this was a different kind of darkness, almost like a void. I felt a presence, something or someone sitting on my chest. I struggled, trying to push it away, and it felt real, solid. Then, just as suddenly as it appeared, it was gone. I sat up, my heart racing, and grabbed the dream catcher hanging above my bed, holding it tight until I calmed down. People might not believe these things, but they happened to me. I've had my share of strange experiences, especially in Arizona, where the desert holds many secrets. Some I can explain, but others, like the shimmering figures in the hospital or the oppressive darkness in my room, remain mysteries. I've learned to live with them, accepting that some things are beyond our understanding.